So I shall like to begin this meeting by quoting an event from G. Narayan's memoirs. G. Narayan was a former Rishi Valley School principal, and he was also nephew of Krishnaji. So he said that around 1975 he happened to be in Ohio, and that time Sunanda Patwardhan and Pama Patwardhan, they were also there. And one day in the morning, after having his bath, and Krishnaji sent for these people. So Sunandaji and G. Narayan, they went to Krishnaji's room, and Krishnaji was still sitting on his bed with bathrobe on him, with his legs spread, and he told them that Buddha is here, ask questions. So that time G. Narayan describes that Krishnaji's face brightened up, his eyes also started looking very bright, and the whole room was filled up with some kind of sacred presence. And both of them, they were overawed. And then Krishnaji, when they couldn't ask any question, Krishnaji asked them, what is the essence of my teaching? Then G. Narayan hesitantly said, you are the world. So Krishnaji accepted that, but then he asked, what else? And both of them couldn't answer anything because they were completely overwhelmed by that presence. So finally Krishnaji himself said, observer is the observed. So it seems that this observer is the observed is the essence of Krishnaji's teaching as told by Krishnaji himself. And therefore I think probably if we can understand this statement, understand in the sense of realizing it, then probably the other things which Krishnaji is talking about may be easier to understand or to follow. So there is a lot of things said about observer is the observed. But I think before we can understand this statement, we have to inquire into what is the nature of the observer. Who is the observer and what is its nature? How it is or from what it is made up of. And then probably we may be, as we explore this nature of observer, we may start seeing how the observer is the observed. Now, while inquiring into what is consciousness and consciousness made up of its content, we had gone into how the content of the consciousness is getting formed. Now, this content is none different than the observer itself, the entity which acts, which observes, which hears, which in fact lives its life according to that content. And how is it made up of? And we can briefly go into it, how the observer comes into being. We have said that whenever there is an input from the environment, there is a sensation caused within, and that sensation gives an experience of being alive, experience of a living experience, and that is what makes that form feel alive. So we feel alive because of various sensations and feelings that arise in us. Now, whatever gives a more intense experience of being alive, that content becomes important. So naturally, among all the content, that particular content acquires importance or significance. And that is what the first sense of this observer. So observer is nothing but a collection of images through which it feels alive, it feels active. And these images, they may not be permanent, they may be varying, because some of the images through which it doesn't feel that much sensation, maybe those images they get dropped, and other images which makes it feel more alive, they get connected with that, and so on. Without these sensations and feelings, these images, they are not alive at all. Then they are just like the images in a computer, because the computer images, they don't have this sensation of being alive. They don't have any feelings. They are just the images. So without these sensations and feelings, the images by themselves, they will be just mechanical. And according to the program, they may keep on getting accumulated, they may respond, but then there is no life in it. So it seems that these sensations and feelings, they make these images alive. And when the images are alive like this, the sense of the observer, sense of the me, seems to be inevitable. So probably it is in the order of the nature that this sense of me or the observer has to be formed. But once it is formed, then its activity all begins, because it wants to enhance its living experience. It wants to have different kinds of sensations. It wants to have all kinds of experiences, so that it feels big, it feels more, and so on. So then this whole process of accumulating knowledge through experiences begins, and the content of consciousness starts getting building up. So this is the observer, which is made up of images having a lot of psychological content, and this observer then decides everything. It responds to the various inputs it receives from the environment. Now, how this observer is visible? Now, let us come to the actual experience. Say we are looking at some object outside of us, say a tree. So there are light rays coming from this tree, passing through our eyes, creating an optical image, and that image going to the brain. and then the brain processes it, means compares it with already stored images, and then finding out the matching image, and then assigning the label of the matching image to this optical image, and the process of recognition is complete. Now this is all quite natural. This is what happens, and in case of a computer, when this happens, there is no problem. Then in case of us, when the image of the tree is received, now to that image there is a reaction from the accumulated images as the observer. That means there is a psychological response or psychological reaction from the observer to this image which has been received, and that psychological reaction is in terms of likes, dislikes, or in terms of uh, activating some psychological state, or in terms of some psychological reaction. And once that happens, then there is no longer observation of that object. That means initially we are looking at a tree. Looking at a tree means the image of the tree is formed within us, and to that image the observer reacts, and it may react in terms of many more images. It may form an image, which means that when the observer says, yes, I like that tree, then I like that tree is another image formed by the observer. And then there is no longer observation taking place, because once it is a tree, this fact is noticed, then probably observer doesn't feel any necessity to continue to observe that object any further, unless it wants to collect or gather additional information. So if you want to find out what kind of tree it is, whether it is mango tree or whether it is tamarind tree or any other tree, then you observe again and find out. So all that activity of the observer begins. So looking at the outside objects, the tree is the observed, and the entity which is observing that tree, that is the observer. So there are these two distinct entities. But now when we talk about observing within or looking within, which means that we want to look at the observer itself. So in that case, the observer itself is the observed, because that is what we want to look at. So the observer trying to look at itself. But can the observer look at itself? It cannot, unless it separates itself, which means that the reaction from the observer. Now that reaction, unless it is separated from the observer cannot look at it. So whatever the observer wants to look at, it has to separate itself from it, and then it can look at it or do whatever it wants to do. So say when there is a psychological reaction, then according to that psychological reaction, the observer says that yes, I am angry. If the psychological reaction is that of anger, then the observer says I am angry. And then I am angry is an image, and to that image this observer further reacts saying that, oh, I should not be angry. So it creates another image based upon its knowledge, its experience, because it finds that to be angry ends up in unacceptable consequences, and therefore it says that, oh, I should not be angry. So there is a first reaction, which is the reaction of anger, and to that reaction there is still another reaction which says that I should not be angry. So these two opposite reactions, naturally there will be conflict, and in that conflict lot of energy is consumed, is wasted, and any kind of such conflict leads to suffering. So is it possible to look at the observer without creating further image of reaction? Means, for example, again the same example we are taking, that of anger. There is a reaction of anger. Now, is it possible to observe that reaction of anger without creating further image that which says that, oh, I should not be angry, or anger is bad? So if it is possible to observe without such a reaction, then in that observation the reaction of anger will be visible as it is. Because if we closely look at the way we observe things, because the moment the first impression is received, our whole mechanism starts doing something about it. The very first action or reaction is that of recognition, and after recognition the whole lot of content from the memory gets associated with that recognized image, and then we end up in some kind of psychological state depending upon what kind of content, psychological content, has got associated with it. So we had gone into it with some example in the workshop on consciousness, that how the thinking process is triggered by the initial thought or initial image, and how it lands us up in some kind of psychological state. So is it possible to keep on observing, that is, to keep on looking at whatever you may be looking. I mean, to be simple, and you can even take an external object. Again, a tree. So that tree has formed an image within us, that is the image of that tree. And when the observer gets busy in doing something with that image, then there is no more observing, there is no more looking at the tree. The observer has already separated itself from that tree, and then it is busy in doing something about that image. Now, what we are asking is it possible to remain with that image? Not only remain with that image, but possible to continue to look at that object. Because as long as observer is doing something about the image it has received, which means that it is separate from the observed. Because without that separation, it can't do anything with the observed. The very fact that it is doing something with the observed, which means that it has already separated itself from the observed, and then it is doing something about it, further reacting to it. Krishnaji has mentioned one story of a painters or from the ancient China, which says that if an artist wanted to paint a tree, then he won't start painting right away. He will first observe the tree. And in that observation, he will continue to observe until he has realized the whole existence of that tree. Which means that he will continue to observe until there is no space between him and the tree. Which means that he becomes the tree, or he is the tree, psychologically speaking. There is no space between himself and tree. So only when such thing happens, then he used to start painting, not until then. Now, most of our tendency is that as soon as we receive the image, we are no longer interested in observing, but we are more interested in doing something about that image. So we are unable to hold that image. And that image may be quite imperfect. We may not have seen it with all the details. We may not have seen it very clearly. But even before that, we start doing something about it. Because you must have seen that when you look at a tree, you said, yes, I have looked at tree, and you may give all the information, what tree it is and so on. Right? But if you are asked to draw a sketch of that tree, then you find that you are unable to draw it because actually you have not seen that tree with all those details. So if you want to draw a sketch, then you again start looking at the tree. Then you start looking at its shape, then you start looking at its other details and so on. Which means that in the first instance, you had not seen any of those things. You had just seen an overall shape. And the image of that tree which is formed in you is the image of that overall shape, missing all the details. Now, with such kind of images, probably you don't realize the observed because the image is incomplete. It is not the exact representation of what you are looking at. And with that kind of image, the observer or we, start reacting to it, processing it, and doing things about it. So even ordinary objects we are not seeing clearly. There is a vagueness in the kind of image that we receive or we form in our mind. So naturally, with such vague images, we fail to understand that object. And same thing happens when we try to look at ourselves. We look at ourselves with that, with very vaguely. So there is no clarity, and with that vagueness, we start to deal with that, and then we fail in that. So is it possible to look without the image, without the psychological reaction as an image? That means without creating another image. Because observer feels alive when it is active in some way or other. And therefore, it is always trying to do something about the observed. And because of that, the observed is not seen as it is, or rather not seen at all, because the observer is busy with its own activity with regard to the observed. So we have said that it is in the psychological realm that the observer is not different from the observed. That means when we are trying to look at or observe the psychological content within us, and this observer is made up of that content, and therefore it is not different from the observed. Now, what happens if the observer realizes that it is not different from the observed? That means all the reactions are not different from itself. Then what is its response? That means the very reaction of anger is not different from me as the observer. So I am that reaction. So if I am that reaction, will there be a further reaction to it in terms of likes and dislikes? Because if there is a further reaction, it amounts to saying that I don't like myself, or I like myself. So if I am not different from the psychological reaction, then there is no further reaction from me to that psychological reaction, which means that there is only that psychological reaction. And in such a case, because there is no further reaction, so there is no observer. Because observer is visible or present in the form of a reaction. And there is no further reaction. That means there is no observer which is visible. So there is only that initial psychological reaction that has arisen, which say in this case, the example we have taken is the reaction of anger. So only that reaction is there. That means only anger is there. And that anger itself is not different from the observer. And therefore, in the absence of any reaction from the observer not being there, the reaction of anger is also not there. Which means that there is nothing to observe. Both the reaction and the observer, they are not there, they disappear. And there is that emptiness. Now this is an explanation probably which may understand intellectually. But when we go back to our day-to-day living or day-to-day experience, we still say that I feel different, I feel separate from what I look at or what I think. So how does one then realize this unity or this non-duality? Because intellectually, with the description, we may say that yes, it looks like that, it is so. But then it is so or it looks like that, maybe only an additional knowledge or additional information. So which becomes additional content of our consciousness. And with that additional knowledge, we continue to live a dualistic life. That means we may keep on saying that yes, observer is not separate from the observed. But yet in actual life, we'll be living as per that the observer is separate from the observed. So how one is to realize this? Because it is one thing to say that yes, I know observer is observed. But it is quite another thing where one actually lives that truth. So how is one to realize it in one's day-to-day life? So there is a sense of awareness. That means anything coming in your vicinity, anything, any input received from outside creates that sense of awareness. You are aware that yes, there is something around you, or you are aware of the object, or you are aware of the sensation that is generated due to contact with the external object, or a sensation which arises due to your own inner activity. But there is this sense of awareness. That means you sense the existence of that object, or of that sensation, or of that feeling. So in this awareness, first of all, there is an awareness of that sensation or of that object. And then the observer takes over. The center as the me takes over and starts doing something about that object or that sensation and so on. But then, is there an awareness of the activity of that observer, of that self? Now you will find that yes, there is an awareness of the activity of the observer also. That means you are aware of the sensation that has been produced within. To that sensation, there is a reaction from the observer, and then there is awareness of that reaction. And then whatever further happens, there is an awareness of that. And through this kind of awareness, we can go into further details of that. I mean, what the, say, the reaction of the observer, that I don't like it or I like it. So there is an awareness of that reaction. And then whatever further is there, there is an awareness of that also. But in that awareness, if there is a sense of dislike, and then if you say that no, I don't like to look at that, and therefore you stop looking, then that awareness is over. Then there is no longer awareness of what is happening. But whatever that is happening, irrespective of like and dislike, irrespective of what it does to you, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, right, and therefore you say no, I have to stop this, or I'll give it up, then the awareness is no longer there. The observation has stopped. But whatever that is happening, all of that is being aware of. So if there is a sense of discomfort, even that sense of discomfort is being aware of. So only through such kind of awareness, when everything that the observer is doing is being aware of, and only through this kind of awareness there can be a realization that whatever way the observer is reacting, that reaction is still part of the observer. It is still the observer. It is not different than that. So any reaction on the part of the observer is still the continuation of the observer. So this realization brings to an end the activities of the observer. The observer no longer reacts because there is a realization that any kind of reaction is just further adding up, and that reaction is not different from the observer. It is the same. So when we are living our day-to-day life, are we aware of not only what is happening around us, but are we aware of what is happening within us in terms of reactions, in terms of sensations, in terms of feelings, in terms of arising of various psychological reactions? In this awareness, there is no sense of the observer. There is no sense that I am being aware. Because the moment that sense is created, there is no longer awareness, because then the choice is already made, and then it is the observer which has taken over. It is the me as the center which has taken over, so it is no longer awareness. But the moment there is a realization that the me has taken over, then that itself is the beginning of awareness, because then that activity of the me as taking over whatever that is being observed, that activity is also being aware of, and therefore there is that awareness. Now if this awareness is sustained, then it gives rise to a kind of attention leading to insight. Because first you are aware, and whatever you are aware, your attention is attracted towards it. You attend to it. Through that attention, there is the learning of that which is being attended to. And that leads to a different kind of understanding. where the very thing to be understood is no longer there. So I think I have briefly explained the whole process of how one can go about inquiring into this core statement of Krishnaji's teaching. And I think your questions will make it more precise, and they can take our understanding deeper further.
Ishwarji?
Yeah.
May I say something?
Yes.
The process of perception is from the various
Yeah, from the various sensory organs, various senses. Yes.
And so Krishnaji in in the video, he says that, and I of course said about the example of the tree which you pointed out, where you've described the visual process of apprehending the tree.
Yeah.
But equally, there may be smells and sounds of rustling. All that coming. So so Krishnaji in the video, he says that whenever you're in contact with whatever, you first deduce. That means make your observation and then begin to induce or analyze. So I found that to be something which I learned today in the process, and it was further enhanced by the very nice way you explained things. And the danger, I think, sir, is that in the process of this, our natural instinct is to gather, form images, form a virtual reality, and then if you're not careful, that virtual reality seems to be the real thing.
Yeah, I mean, one may forget the connection between that virtual reality and the external actuality, and may get lost in that virtual reality itself with total disregard to the external actuality. So that could happen. Once that connection is lost, then one is in illusion. Then there is
and if you're able to
an illusion.
And if you're able to maintain that connection, then that observe is the observed happens, I think.
Sir, may I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, what is it? I mean, by what is that action of ours which prompts the observer to arise? I mean, say for example, even in my one's own case, it's not that there is a sense of observer for each and everything. Like for example, if I see a car on the road, there isn't a strong sense of observer. But if I see something else, say for example, a sweet shop or something, there is a stronger sense of observer. So it is about the notion that we have formed about eating sweets and not liking myself for eating sweets. All of that is one thing. But within myself or across people, what is it that is driving that strength behind the observer, and what can we do to kind of not in a dualistic mode, but how can we kind of dissolve, so to say, if you can suggest?
Yeah, because you see, within ourselves, we have stored of images in a graded form, in the sense that certain images are more important to us, certain images are not that important to us, and all the important images together is what is the observer. Now, when those images are challenged or those images are provoked, then we have this strong sense of the observer. But when the images which do not matter much, if they are provoked, then there is not much strong sense of the observer. That means there is no strong reaction to that provocation, because only the images which are not that important for the observer, they are being challenged, and therefore the response is not that much. But if any image which matters to that observer, that means those images which are very important for the observer. Now those images, if they are challenged, then there will be a much stronger reaction from the observer. So the observer will be strongly visible there, right? So that is how we can explain that we don't react in the same intensity, with the same intensity as the to different kinds of external stimuli or external provocations. Just as you said that with certain things you are quite strongly aware of yourself as the observer, and in certain cases you are not that strongly aware of yourself as the observer. It depends on what is being challenged within you and how far important it is to you as the observer.
And is it fundamentally fear which drives the invoking of the observer? And more importantly, what is the implication of this? There seems to be this constant voice, or there seems to be this sense of duality and all of that. So what is the implication of this when we are bringing up children or in a school?
Yes, I think fear is definitely the driving kind of energy, or fear is the factor which drives the responses or reactions of the observer naturally. And we had seen that fear is a reaction to a provocation which is considered as a danger to one's existence. That means any living being, when its life is threatened, then its response to that threat, it manifests or expresses itself as fear. So the same thing happens here also. The observer, which is a psychological entity, and that psychological entity also has to feel secured. It has to be secured. But when there is a threat to its existence, then the reaction to that threat is in terms of fear. So when there is a threat to psychological existence, there is a reaction in the form of a psychological fear. And then that fear will drive the further reaction of that observer. So the psychological entity also has to feel completely psychologically secured. But if it doesn't feel secured, then it will behave, or it will respond as per that sense of insecurity. And that generates fear. Now, with respect to children, we have to not only provide them the physical security, but also we have to see that they also feel psychologically secured. Because if they don't feel secured, then you won't be able to relate with them properly, and also they will not only be not comfortable, but they will also fail to learn anything that you would like them to learn. So they have to be first psychologically, they have to feel psychologically secured. So which means that in your interaction, you should not create, or you should not do anything which will create a sense of insecurity in them, right? That means, for example, if you suddenly shout at the child, right? You might have shouted because you might have seen some physical danger that child is getting into, and just to avoid that, you may have shouted, but then that shout can generate a psychological insecurity in that child. So it is going to react according to that sense of psychological insecurity. So which is a kind of fear. So in dealing with children, you should be careful not to threaten their psychological security, in the sense that they should feel completely secured in your company. Only then they will be at home with you, and then only it is possible to interact with them, relate with them, and through which they can learn whatever you want them to learn.
Sir, one small question actually. Hello.
Yeah. Please ask.
Yeah, in the very beginning, you mentioned one thing, that this observer creating the sense of me may be a nature's mechanism, something. So for optical level, we can understand that nature has created a sense of me. If there is a fear, then I run. I run to save this particular body. That sense of I is important. So in the beginning of lecture, you mentioned one thing, that this creating observer may be a mechanism, or maybe the arrangement of nature or something. If that is, then it's very, very difficult to do. That is why dropping the self is becoming so difficult. Maybe it's a physical level is okay, but it is a psychological level also. It's a natural, some mechanism to create that sense of self. Because I always wonder why this sense of self is so strong. Why it is difficult to drop? It's created by nature, then it's very difficult to drop.
No, it's not created by nature. It gets created when we live our life. It's not that the nature is creating it and then we have to struggle with it. No, I don't think it is like that. What I'm saying, with whatever is the arrangement of the nature, in that arrangement, when you start living your life and start responding to whatever is happening around you, so in that it looks almost inevitable that this sense of self is getting formed. So it doesn't mean that the nature has created it. The living beings, as they live their life, they develop this sense of the self, or the sense of the self is getting developed. So what I was trying to point out was that it is not an accident. It is not something which is unwanted and yet happened. The only point I wanted to make was that in the given arrangement or in the given order of the nature, it almost looks inevitable that this sense of self gets formed. Because then only there is this vivid, you can say, living experience. Then there is also the buildup of knowledge, both the factual knowledge, and along with the factual knowledge, even the psychological knowledge gets accumulated. So all this will go on until a point where there is this inquiry which starts finding out why things are happening the way they are happening. And then through that inquiry, there is this awareness as to what exactly is happening. And so there is then a different kind of learning. So all that sequence is there. And maybe without this, probably it wouldn't have been possible. So there was some kind of psychological evolution, in the sense that gathering of more and more psychological content, and through that psychological content, enriching the experience of being alive. But then it continued only up to a point. After that, there was only the suffering or unacceptable consequences. Therefore, this inquiry became necessary as to why is it happening. And then through that inquiry, then learning that, yes, there is one kind of learning which is in terms of knowledge, but can there be another learning where there is no need to gather knowledge, and so on. And also the different kind of observation, different kind of listening. So all that thing that comes up. But if you merely take it as an accident, as something which shouldn't have happened but happened, right, then it becomes altogether a different thing. So maybe it is not like that.
So,
yeah.
So when you say it is almost inevitable,
yeah,
it sounds natural, isn't it? So the way I want to just maybe think of it in a slightly different way is that, and the previous question also was connected, maybe, so is it only fear that leads to reaction? Actually, I think each stimulus, there is a reaction.
Yes.
And the ability to be aware or apprehend the reaction to stimulus which is occurring. It may generate fear or whatever. Sensation may create whatever perception. So awareness would be to be able to, from moment to moment, be able to look at that. And then, like you explained, sir, awareness would then, if you're able to do that over a period of time, then it becomes attention. And then finally, a point where, but it is not as if, that you will finally arrive at some place. So it's a lot of hard work and we need to keep doing that. And so in that sense, I feel that it is inevitable, or I don't know, I mean, it is natural that to a stimulus, there will be a reaction. And the only way is to generate an awareness about this, and it would lead to this different kind of learning.
Yeah, that's right. Because reactions are inevitable, but then if there is an awareness of those reactions, then a different kind of learning can happen through that awareness.
Yes, sir.
So this kind of thing probably doesn't exist in animals. Probably they are not self-aware in that sense. They are not aware of their reactions or their feelings and so on. They simply just behave according to whatever sensation or feeling arises in them. But this
maybe not, sir.
quality of self-awareness may be unique to human beings.
Maybe not, because in some of the reactions which especially say elephants or the order mammals, they seem to have,
particularly the animals who are in contact with human beings, probably
maybe
they exhibit some of these qualities,
maybe
in a very rudimentary form.
As I see to it, the reaction occurs. The reaction is not a problem, but the another reaction, that reaction shouldn't have arise. That creates a real conflict, actually. You also pointed out the reaction is natural, inevitable, it's okay. But main conflict and energy lost happens in me when I observe. Immediately reaction comes, and immediately another, the reaction shouldn't have come. Why this reaction comes? That second reaction create a conflict.
Yeah. I mean, a reaction arises, it is being looked at, and then it subsides. There is no problem in that. But if there is a further reaction to that reaction, which really creates the conflict.
Why
Why do we create such illusions in an evolutionary perspective? Is it outdated now? How was it helpful before?
Why do we create illusions?
Yes, yes.
I think the illusion gets created when the connection between the actuality and the reality is lost. That is when the illusion gets created. I mean, say, let us take an example. There is some input from the external object, and that input creates a sensation in us. And the awareness of that sensation tells us that, yes, such and such object must be existing outside. So sensation is related to or corresponds to an external object. And therefore, whenever that sensation is there, we presume or we say that there is corresponding external object. But sometimes what can happen is that the thought through its own activity can create that sensation. That means the sensation is not received from the external object, but that same sensation is generated through the activity of the thinker, through the activity of the thought. And therefore, from such a sensation, if you say that therefore there is an external object, or therefore you start assuming that there is an external object, although it is not there. But because you have the sensation, you say that yes, it must be there. And then you start behaving according to that. Then that is an illusion. Because actually there is no such corresponding object outside. The sensation is generated through the activity of the thinker. And if there is an awareness that yes, this sensation is due to the activity of the thinker, then there is no illusion. But if that awareness is not there, then corresponding to that sensation, immediately there is a reference to the corresponding external object. And therefore the person starts believing that because this sensation is there, therefore there must be the corresponding external object. Then he has put himself into an illusion. I mean, to give a more concrete example, say you hypnotize a person, and in that hypnotic state, you give, say, some potato to that person and say that it is a delicious apple. So the image of that object as a delicious apple, right, creates that kind of sensation in that human being, and he considers that potato as a delicious apple, and he actually enjoys it, it relishes it. So which is again a kind of illusion. Or you can create another sensation in that person. Say outside it may be very hot, but you can tell that person that outside it is very cold. And so he will respond as if it is very cold outside. So his body will start shivering and so on. So that sensation of cold which he experiences actually has nothing to do with the external environment. External environment is actually so hot that we are perspiring. But this person is actually shivering because he has that sensation of cold that is generated through his thinking activity, which means the hypnotizer has created that sensation in him. and he is then referring that sensation to the corresponding external environment, and therefore assuming that therefore outside it must be very cold. So that is how the illusions they get created. And within ourselves also, we do create certain images about ourselves, about others, and these images may not refer to the actual facts. They may refer to something imagined ideas or imagined opinions, and therefore in that sense also we end up in creating lots of illusions, because we may have a certain opinion of certain thing, and that opinion may not correspond to the actual fact. It may be just my imagination or my way of looking at it, and therefore it turns out to be an illusion rather than a fact. So in that sense also we are generating lots of illusions, not only about ourselves or what we are, but also about others as to what they are.
Sir, the next question.
Yeah.
Does fear invoke because belief in sense of self, or does sense of self arise because of fear sensation?
See, whenever the self is threatened, the fear arises. And when the fear arises, that sense of self is further strengthened, because then it has to mobilize all its resources to overcome that threat because of which the fear has arisen. So it works actually the both ways.
We are generating illusions, but why we are generating, but why do we create illusions? I am assuming that it is pretty commonplace for people to create it. It is connected with the previous question, sir.
Yeah, no, but do you mean to say that we are creating illusions deliberately? Do we create illusions deliberately? Or illusions get created because of unawareness? Now, who will create illusions deliberately? And why should he create? Maybe to put another person into a difficult situation. Maybe you may try to create an illusion for that another person. But why would you create illusion for yourself? Why will you put yourself into an illusion or illusory state? I think the only reason I may find is the pursuit of pleasure. If you experience pleasure by being in some kind of illusion, then maybe you will put yourself in illusion. Or another is that you may feel psychologically secured by considering that illusion or by putting yourself into that illusion. And therefore you may try to put yourself in that illusion. But here, although it may be an illusion, the person in illusion may not sense it as an illusion. He may take it as a fact. What I'm trying to say is that saying that it is an illusion and yet continuing with that illusion doesn't look very likely, unless that illusion is, or to remain in that illusion is a pleasurable state. Then a person may not mind to be in that kind of illusion. But when it comes to the sense of feeling secured, then the person who is feeling secure due to illusion is not aware that it is an illusion. In fact, he takes it as a fact. But if it turns out to be an illusion, then he will no longer feel secured. For example, belief in something, say belief in God, makes oneself feel completely secured. But that belief in God may be an illusion, because there may not be a God as I have imagined. And that God may not behave according to my imagination. And therefore, if that belief in God is non-factual, then there is no longer any illusion about it, and therefore it doesn't provide the kind of psychological security it would have provided. So, which means that the person who believes in something in order to get psychological security, he is not aware of that belief as an illusion. For him, it is not an illusion, it is a fact, or it is a reality. It cannot happen that he may say that, yes, my belief in God is an illusion, but still I keep on believing and I will get the psychological security. That kind of situation is not possible. But that kind of situation is possible in the case of pursuit of pleasure. That a person may say that, yes, I know that this is an illusion, but this gives me tremendous pleasure, so therefore I am pursuing it.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
I have a question. Sir,
Yeah,
actually, more than a question,
yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
confusion.
Yeah.
You explained that the activity of the observer takes the observer away from the observed, creates a division between the observer and the observed.
Yeah.
And then you also explained that can the activity of the observer itself be observed?
Yeah.
Now, then the third part you said observe, and therefore observe. I'm not able to correlate this with the statement that observer is the observed. So could you kindly explain that? How does one jump to that statement that observer is the observed based on this understanding?
Yeah, the reaction of the observer. Now, reaction of the observer is being observed. Now, is that reaction different from the observer? Because if observer is made up of that reaction itself, then is it different from that reaction? It may consider itself as different because by that kind of consideration, it is able to do something about that reaction. But if it is not different from that reaction, then it cannot do anything about it. So when will the observer realize that it is not different from the reaction? So that is where we brought up this issue of point of awareness. It means only through that awareness there can be a realization that the reaction is part of the observer. Reaction is not different from the observer. Although the observer may feel that it is different. So what we are trying to say is that the observer itself is not seeing that it is the observed. But in that awareness, it is seen that observer is not different from the observed. And therefore then the observer is no longer active.
So awareness prevails and not the observer as a result of this.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir,
Yeah.
Like if the sensation is being observed, like for example, the anger, the sensation in the form of it has been observed, and externally we always see there is a reason. So at that, if I'm going to stay with the sensation, it has a charge or energy which need to be released, or somewhere it is not, the anger is not just observed as an anger, but along with it there is some amount of energy which normally comes out on somebody.
Yes.
So if I'm observing it, it is my anger and my reaction. Neither I can hold it nor I am able to show it on others. That becomes a very tricky situation. So
Yeah. No, actually, it is a question of remaining with it. See, in the normal situation, that energy will always try to find some channel through which it dissipates itself. And that channel may be some person on whom you take out all that anger, although you are not angry with that person. But the initial situation which has led to that reaction of anger, now that anger has to dissipate itself, that energy, and therefore it may find whosoever happens to be before such a person, so he may become the victim of the expression of that anger, and he may feel lost as to why this person got angry with me. But remaining with that anger, that means remaining with that sensation of anger. Right? Now, if you try to suppress it, then it is bound to explode at some given point. But suppression is not the right action. Then if you succumb to it, then it will lead to some kind of behavior, some kind of action, which is going to generate consequences which may not be acceptable. But so we are saying neither to suppress nor to give in, but just remaining with it. So that could be a quite uncomfortable situation or sensation, to remain with a reaction which is all the time urging you either to express or to suppress, and yet not giving in to any of that, but just remaining with it. Now, if one is able to do that, then that energy subsides. But to do that, there has to be this awareness, this attention which arises out of this awareness. Once there is an awareness, then through that awareness, that gives rise to that attention. And that attention actually probably becomes a channel, if we want to put it in that way, for the release of that energy of anger, of that reaction. Because all that energy becomes the energy of attention. And therefore attention becomes more intense and much stronger.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Kishoreji?
Yeah.
I had a question about observer is the observed. And that was pertaining to listening. So some of the, I think the example I wanted to bring up was when we are listening to somebody. In that context, when I mean, I'm in engineering sense, I'm extrapolating it a little bit. So it doesn't mean that you become the other person, but it almost means that you're paying so much attention to the conversation at what's happening in terms of your reactions and what the other person saying, that you almost forget yourself, right? It's almost like you have so much patience, or you don't run into conclusions, but you are just giving your complete attention, right? And just to is when you just mentioned to Sunita about that the previous question, is it like a habit that we can, like most of the reactions that we have which help us, which kind of avoid us from staying with that moment, with that the reaction, is because we are habituated to react, or react or outburst, or suppress and then outburst. But is this is this also a habit that we can form, where we learn to just hold that like, not like even the discomfort of watching the reaction, we just
no, I don't think it can we can develop it into a habit. Because habit is again a kind of suppression. Actually, there is no sense of holding that reaction. Actually, it is just remaining with it or being with it and so on. I think probably holding it is not a right kind of word, because who is going to hold it? And so just by being aware, or just remaining with whatever it is, and that remaining may be a quite uncomfortable feeling, because the observer always wanting to do something about it, and yet it is being seen that to do anything about it is futile, and therefore in that awareness nothing is being done with respect to that, but just by remaining with it. And so although it may create a feeling of discomfort, but yet remaining with that feeling of discomfort, and whatever further may arise out of that, remaining with that. So in that case, then that energy will not channelize itself through some kind of reaction, but that energy can become the energy of attention. That means you are attending to that reaction so completely that there is no difference between the two. So the energy, there is no difference between the reaction and that attention. The reaction is being completely attended to. Means the energy of the reaction becomes the energy of the attention. So when you give complete attention to something, then that something is no longer there. It's gone.
Morning, Kishorji.
Yeah, good morning.
Can I just add a few points here, sir?
Yeah, do.
Sir, like, like all these emotions, and they arise in day-to-day life, experiences and all. The desire, jealousy, whatever they are. Like, when you are observing them, and observing the reaction and all of that, that means when you're staying with that, maybe I think the whole thing starts explaining itself to you. The reason why the anger in the first place, what are the contributing factors to it? Isn't it so?
That's
how it got triggered. And when that means one has got some time to, when one is remaining with that, all those things start falling into place. and they start explaining to you, like why one is that place state at all, like who is at fault, the other is at fault, whatever it is. All those things start unveiling themselves.
That's right. Yeah. Actually, you see, when a person is at the height of the sensation, he is not able to, his intellectual apparatus is not able to function properly because it will be highly biased according to that sensation. But as the sensation recedes, then the intellectual apparatus may be able to function in a more logical and rational way, and therefore in a better position to understand a situation which led to that kind of reaction. So then this,
not condemning, not justifying,
right,
not all these factors are there, and not just with that, because nobody gets angry just like that. There may be some reasons, which got triggered. It's not that one becomes angerless throughout their life. It's not like that, no, sir. These emotions, they will be there. They keep coming, in life, in our day-to-day interaction. But that important point is remain with them and stay with them and see, so that things start unfolding on their own. The reason why it is so or so. That's what you want to add here.
I mean, through this awareness, the reactions get revealed as they are and not interpreted by the thinker according to its knowledge or according to its background. So that is what is important.
Thank you.
Kishoji, there's one more question in the chat. Can I read it?
Read, please.
On opposite side of anger, the feel-good sensation arising out of good, generous, charitable action is also to be observed, and not a justifiable ground for acceptability, isn't it?
Yes. I got it now, what she said.
Yes.
So just as we are observing the so-called negative sensations or emotions, then we have to also observe the so-called positive sensations also. Because usually we do take notice of what we do not like or what we dislike, but we easily accept what we like. Say somebody praising us, we immediately accept that praise, although it may be a false praise. But if somebody condemning us, we immediately react to it. We don't accept it, although that condemnation may be a fact, maybe a right. Maybe we deserve that, but yet we don't accept it in the negative sense. So whether it is condemnation or appreciation, both of these feelings, they need to be observed. They need to be attended to. That is true, because they are the response, our response to the external situation, because external situation has provoked it, and therefore their status is same. One is, actually speaking, one is not more desirable than the other, because both are the response to the external provocation. So their status is the same, but yet we seem to accept one and reject the other. So that is again our response based on pleasure and pain. Whatever is pleasurable, we seem to accept it. Whatever is painful, we seem to move away from it. So, and that response is the response of the observer. And therefore, it needs to be watched. So what she has said in that statement is all right. I mean, that is how it has to be done.
Sir, there is a follow-up question to Sunitaji's question. What to do with anger that is suppressed in the past?
So, yeah, so that anger may come up whenever it has the opportunity to come up in the form of a sensation. And then that is the time to watch it, to live with it, to remain with it. So anything suppressed is bound to come up at some point of time or other. And whenever it comes up, then that is the time when one has to observe it and remain with it. Then the same thing will happen as could happen with any reaction when we stay with it, or when we remain with it.
Sir, I have one question.
Yeah.
Sir, how does this awareness, the attention, observation come in contact with the deep-seated emotions and content?
So that is just now what we have said, no?
Yes, sir.
Exactly the same thing. When there is a corresponding external situation which is capable of provoking a response from deeply buried reactions, then they will come up. But if there is no corresponding external situation, they may still remain buried, and therefore you may not be aware of them at all. So does that mean that one has to dig in oneself in order to discover these? Right. But that digging in will be meaningful only when you have been aware of whatever that is there on the surface, and all those things, they have come to an end. Only then this digging will be meaningful. Otherwise, whatever is there, you are not even aware of that. And then you want to add to that the deeply buried things. So that is going to create a lot of confusion and disorder. So I think there is actually no need to dig up the deeply buried reactions at all, because as you are working out the reactions which are on the surface, and as they get worked out, then the buried reactions, they start showing up. So one doesn't have to dig them at all. And due to circumstances, if they surface, then one can deal with them in the same way as one would deal with any other reaction, in the sense that then one has to be watchful about them, one has to watch them and see what they are actually, and so on, in the same way.
Thank you.
So I think that is the approach. Yeah.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. Yeah.
Sir, I have a question like, is the self or it always wants to win? The living being, it always wants to win, always wanted to show up. So is it the duality which says that the thinker always wants to win, or is it the very nature that it always wants to win?
Yeah, the thinker always wants to win, whatever it considers, whatever he may mean by winning. Winning means the further strengthening of the thinker, of the self. So that is what he calls as winning. And if he gets weakened, then that he calls as losing. So naturally, the self will always want to strengthen itself. And therefore, it always likes to win.
So is this the very nature, sir? When a being is born, so that comes as a...
Yeah, that is the very nature of the thinker, the self. It always wants to win. Okay. Always wants to dominate. Always wants to suppress which it doesn't like. That is its nature. That is what it tries to do.
Okay, sir.
But I think the sense in which you were wanting to ask question was different. Probably you were not able to put it properly in words. You don't look very happy with this answer.
Always a duality. We always separate me and the feeling. Suppose when you said the fear and the person who is feeling the fear, that I am not the fear.
Yeah.
Something separate from me.
Yeah.
In that sense, there is a duality, which
Yes.
is an illusion that fear itself is me. I am fear. I mean to ask, like, whatever is inside me,
Yeah.
which is very much subjective. So I cannot separate it because that is me. So is there a duality where the thinker, the person who thinks, always sees that something wants to win, and I don't know, sir, if you got it, but I'm unable to put it in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, a thinker creates the duality, and after creating duality, it wants to do something about that from which it has separated itself. And whatever it wants to do, it will only want to do that which will enhance itself, which will make itself bigger. Right? So that is how it will respond. So even if it is fear, then out of that fear, if it is able to expand itself further, if it is able to strengthen itself, then he will behave according to that with respect to that reaction of fear.
So this is the very nature of the being, like it always wants to.
Yeah. That means, like, say, they show that these mafias or gundas, they feel big on the basis of fear. That means the more people are afraid of them, then they feel even bigger and greater than the people who are afraid of them. So they are using fear to expand their selfishness, to expand their self-centeredness.
Okay. So I'll try to frame it in the right way.
Yeah. Maybe in the next session you can ask that. Yeah. So do we stop here and we'll meet at 5:30 in the
Yes,
evening?
sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right.